Right, the bass. So I made all the bass for this track. I didn't use any of the bass from the original song. I don't know why. I think it's probably because the original bass wasn't really a bass line, maybe. I think the band are currently a guitar, vocal, and then synths, keyboards, and drum machine. So not really defined bass line. And I figured that was where I was going to really make this track into a new thing and a new groove. And so real simple. It works with the drums. I'm going to solo the drums and the bass together. So the first bass is this synth bass, which was almost definitely from the Yuhi Repro 1, which is a plug-in version of the Pro 1 by Dave Smith Instruments. Pretty dirty, but I've also kind of put some saturation on, a bit of drive to give it an edge. It's being EQ'd, and then Decapitator is also doing its thing. 100% wet, actually, that's not normal for me. But yeah, that's just doing a little bit of drive, well, quite a lot of drive, evidently, if I turn that off. Love that. Then I've layered that with a real bass, which was, I got a cheap Squier Bronco, and I played this at home on just into my straight into my interface. You've got the attack of the pick on the strings, and then the slightly wonky human feel to it. I'm an okay bass player, but you know, it's locking into the groove in a different way to a synth. And that bass is being run through. It's being run through a couple of things, actually. It's 2 chains. I like to do audio effect rack in Ableton and have multiple chains for like parallel processing. And one of them is going through a really heavy compressor with a bit of EQ boosting the high mids for a bit of presence. That's also then going through H3000 Eventide, which is doing a thickening thing, which is kind of like a doubling effect. Let's see if we can hear that at the same time. Let's just look. Yeah, so this is like a sort of like phasey, chorusy thing. Makes it a bit loose, slightly wonky, filtering off quite a lot of the really low end. And then that's the first chain. The second chain is going into amplitude. Amplitude, which is a solid state bass. So again, it's going through an amp modeling, but it's not pure amp modeling signal, it's like a parallel signal. And that sounds like this. Where is it? Compared to that. So one's really wide and one's down the middle. Both of those are going into compressor, the FET 76, 1176, really squashing it, because I don't really want this bass to be jumping out of the mix. I want it to be controlled, really controlled. And then the Pro Q3, which is doing, if you look at that red bit, that's where it's looking at what signals coming through from other instruments, and I'm cutting out some 82 Hertz because there's a lot of 82 Hertz in the synth bass. So yeah, anyway, that's the bass. I wanted that edgy krautrock lo-fi thing, which is just to my tastes really. And then there's another section of the song which has this kind of more ragged bass, which happens. And that's automated, so the Devil Lock Deluxe by Sound Toys comes on at that point. Makes it more dirty. The synth bass isn't in that section. Additionally, in the first or second verse, there's 2 bass layers which are on like the OP1, so my Teenage Engineering OP1 synth. Not that bassy, but they're doubling the bass part, and they're 2 different performances on slightly different sounds. So one and the other one. Now, I use this all the time, but if you record the same part twice with slightly different sounds, or, you know, they can actually be quite dramatically different sounds, but in the same instrument. So I used the same synth within the OP1, but I tweaked the knobs. And you never know what the knobs are doing on that thing, but basically gave it 2 sounds and then panned them. and it tricks the brain. The brain hears that as one sound, but it hears it as a sound that's really 3D. So with all the bass together, for that second instrumental section, you've got this new sound coming in at that point. And I really like that. And it drops out again. So having things come in and then drop out, you really feel the dynamic change. And yeah, so that's that. There's also a bit like that happening later. As an extra layer, just a mono. So that part was panned, then it comes into mono for that section, which is a third verse where it gets more driving. So I think when I was doing this track, really, everything's really simple. There's not that many elements in it, but positioning, layering, and just having subtle things come in and out really meant that there's new things, you notice new things in the track, but nothing's particularly brash or in your face, other than the bass and the drums and the vocal. But everything else just sort of supports, but creates, nice floaty things for your ears to hear. And then, there's more of that layer with the guitars and stuff coming in. But yeah, that's the thinking behind it. The other bits that I've got going on, there's this synth, which is doubling the synth bass here. So there's another section, another bass line, which I introduced as a break here. An ascending bass line. And yeah, so that's the main synth bass with a supplementary layer, which I've got going through Echo Boy distortion and the Haas avocado, which is the Haas effect, psychoacoustic widening using very short delays, just to wrap that sound around the real bass, the main synth bass. So without it, and it's got lots of top end distortion on it. I've driven that, and the Echo Boy is doing not a lot. It's a little bit of dirt on there. So yeah. Anyway, bass. Actually, I thought the bass was simple, but it's loads.